Hello technicians, welcome to step 3. This is the big hill that we need to climb. After this, it all gets downhill. It's all great. This is an exploded view of the gearbox, which means that they've taken it, kind of pulled it apart so you can see the insides. Basically in this line here, everything coming down this line is on this shaft and goes into this hole here and this hole here. Everything along this line goes on this hex shaft, goes in here and here. Some things we want to make sure we're looking at. These screws here look like they're going to go into this hole, but we're going to put those in last. This is to scale, so that's important. And you can see where the dark apply grease goes. I would build this, then semi-disassemble it, and then put the grease on, and then assemble it again, and then screw it in tight. Here are the tools we use for step 3. So we've got the flush cutter to cut the plastic parts out, and with the bigger screws I like to use bigger screwdrivers, but if you like using the smaller screwdriver, that's fine, but sometimes you can get better contact and better torque with the larger screwdrivers. Here are the components in the bags that you'll need. So we're going to need the left and right housing, as well as our M1 is right there. We've got the two shafts that we'll be using. We'll get more into detail. I just wanted to show you the bags that we're in, and this bag has the gears. And this bag of screws has all the screws we need, including the eyelets and the short spacer, and of course the grease. As I always like to say, please don't eat the grease. Here I've collected all the parts that you'll need for step 3. Just to go through some of them, we've got G1, G2, and 3 looks like this. G1, G2, and G3. The eyelets are these right here in gold. The bushing here that goes here is green. Okay, so it's going to be this. There's going to be 2 of them, so you just trim one off. M1, remember that one was between these 2 housings when it was together. Okay, and you got obviously M2 and M3. We've got the hex shaft and the hex shaft with nut, and then the 3 by 12 millimeter screws. And of course, the grease. Don't need the grease. First, we'll start with the hex shaft with nut. I'd like you to look at, there's a short side and a long side, so we'll be building onto the long side. We won't need this for this one. We'll take G3, and then G2, and then the short metal spacer. A lot of people make a mistake of putting the green bushing on there. We don't want to do that. That's going to cause some issues. And then, of course, we've got a couple of eyelets on either side. So we can assemble that. Okay, that is assembled correctly. We'll move on to the next one. Here is the short shaft. We're going to want to put the green. We're going to want to put the green bushing on first. So sometimes I like to leave it on the ground, then push hard, and then put it perpendicular again to the table, and then press down hard. Okay. Once you get it just a little bit over, that'll work just great. Remember, all we need is about the size of an eyelet. Okay. Orienting it like the picture, then I take G2 and M1, and I've got this side and this side. Now sometimes these fall off really easy, these eyelets, so sometimes I just put them into the casing themselves. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Alright, we're going to take a look at the casing now. So I want to make sure that my green side is towards the long flange. So I've got an eyelet on here already, so I'm just going to do it like that. Okay. To make things a little easier for myself, I'm going to put the eyelet in first. There we go. Now, I want to take this shaft, and remember it's in between. This goes in between, so I just slide this up and push that in. So that might be easier to see like this. So that's in between, so I need to slide it up and then slide it in. Okay, using gravity to help me hold this in place. I put the last eyelet in. All right, then I put the top on. Now, here is a couple of double checks that I like to do. One is I like to make sure that the green of the G1 and the bushing are on the same side. I, of course, like to hold it tight, make sure that it's equal on both sides, and spin it. When it spins nicely, that's great. So now what I recommend is a partial disassembly, okay? And then you can take the grease and grease it up where you need to. Finally, we're going to put the screws in to these 3 holes here. See the countersink, so that way when we screw it in tight, you may want to do 1 screw at a time. I like using the larger screwdriver. So then we screw it in tight. Okay, it's all greased up. What we want to make sure is that you see I kind of did this on purpose. There's an error there where I can fit my fingernail in there. We want this nice and tight because a tight gearbox is going to run correctly. So we make sure it's nice and tight. And you see these counter bore holes are there to hide the tops of the screws. So that's all good. Nice and tight, can't move, but then it rotates nicely. The gearbox is pretty complex, so let's review some errors that I often see. 2 common errors are shown below. One building on the incorrect side, and the other one not using the metal spacers. So we'll start with building on the incorrect side. This has a short side and a long side, and if you build on the short side, when we put this together, you will see that it doesn't sticks way out on one side and not well on the other. Now let's talk about using the green bushing instead of the metal spacer. As you can see here, we've got the green bushing on both of these parts, and when we put it together, we attempt to spin it, and I can't do it. It's bound because that green bushing has pushed it all the way in. Lastly, sometimes people leave the short metal spacer out completely. You can tell that it's going to wiggle a whole lot because it's missing out of there.